This podcast is a project of the Climate Designers Network.
This podcast was supported in part by grant funding from the U.S. Department of Education's Title IX grant program through the University of Illinois Center for Global Studies. The content of this program does not necessarily represent the policy of the U.S. Department of Education, and you should not assume endorsement by the federal government. Hey, this is Eric. Welcome to Season 4 of Climify, where this season we want to help change the system. In our third and final series, we're focused on policy. System change happens both in the grassroots and on the Congress floor. Our policy experts are doing the work of changing the system from within, challenging the assumptions underpinning our resource allocation and ways of governing. The show format is a tad different this season. Each episode is broken into 3 segments. To begin, I'll be joined by one of our researchers on Climify to break down what we both heard in my interview with our guest and what you should listen for. Our second segment is, of course, our interview, which is always still hopeful with plenty of inspiration. And finally, our third segment breaks down what we heard as calls for action in the interview itself and what you can do to change the system through climate action. Well, I'm sitting here with Jacqui Himmel, who's been here on many episodes this season, and joining me today to talk about Thais. Welcome back, Jacqui.
Hi, I know it's been so long.
It's been, what is it, like been a month since we've talked like this?
Yeah, we knocked out a few episodes, took a break, and I'm just coming right back for more.
I feel like it has to do with how fast the summer is feeling like it's going, that it feels like forever ago when it really wasn't that long ago, to be honest.
I know. Like, I can't help, I'm surprised that it's August, but I feel like just yesterday was the beginning of June. So I'm stuck
Yeah.
in this liminal space of I don't really know if I'm almost to the end or still at the beginning. So
You don't have school right back in August, so you don't have that like looming, do you?
yeah. No, I graduated, so I don't have any school
That
looming,
I'm
which
going back. I'm going back to teach in a month from now. So, and we're recording this on July 23rd, just for everyone's
yeah.
knowledge that if this comes out in August, no, it's a month from now.
Yeah.
Well, Thais was a wonderful person to talk with, and I'm wondering if you can give a little bit of an introduction to her for everyone.
Sure. Well, she's a very lively spirit, so I'm excited for everybody to hear her. But a little bit more about her. Thais received her master's degree in science from the Schumacher College in the UK. But she's most notably known for being the co-founder of Eco-Universidade. It's a free university that promotes regenerative learning with future-oriented content. But her purpose is to drive systematic change through educational platforms that facilitate dialogue between different worldviews. And she goes on through this episode to kind of dive into how she got there and how she encourages others to do the same thing.
Yeah, and that's a great segue into what did we feel people need to listen for in Thais's discussion.
I think a major thing that she talks about is we should really listen closely about colonization and mass globalization,
Mhm.
how those two work simultaneously and how that affects localization on cultures, but not just these broad cultures, like small communities. And she specifically talks about Brazil, so the indigenous communities, towns, families, your small circles, and what this mass globalization does to having something unique and having a culture to celebrate it with. Um, and she talks a lot about that. So that's something I'm excited for everybody to kind of listen to her experiences about.
She's another very global person, reminiscent of someone from an earlier episode, Heike Peterson, who, all over the world, and then found her home and is now doing awesome work. And yeah, I think we both talked before we recorded and found a lot of what we're about to say we both agreed upon, and we'll just be repeating your questions about this. But I mean, that's a good thing because I mean, it's very clear, like the messaging is very clear from her. And I'm also excited for people to listen to her because my biggest takeaway from her conversation is that she's just an awesome, kind-hearted person. She
She
is
is, she
so
is.
nice. I had a great time.
Yeah, I also really loved so she didn't just come right out and become a co-founder of this university. You
No.
know, she had a very, like, realistic experience, to get to where she was and where she is now,
Mhm.
which she'll talk more about in the episode, which I loved hearing because it's a very, like, honest experience
Yeah.
that she went through. So, I'm hoping that that kind of touches other people as well, and, not just myself.
Right, yeah, the thing that I resonated with the most from her journey was when she shared her time in marketing
Mhm.
and how that was, for her, clearly not the right place to be,
No.
and that journey out of marketing into where she is now, I think people will relate to. I did. I mean, I had a similar thing happen to me,
Yeah.
so I was just happy to hear that I wasn't alone. I wasn't
Yeah,
alone.
I that
Yeah.
that's a really great thing that kinda hits home for this.
Yeah, and, she has this school she started, so, for me, another big thing to listen for was her conversation around education and how she views that as systems change, right? And I agree with her. And so that whole conversation was one that, hey, you should pay attention to that because I
Yeah.
think it's really important.
Yeah, especially, our calls to action and how we can take that into the classroom and
Oh
start
yeah.
with students. She really it's like unprompted hits right where we needed her to.
Right. Right. Yeah, I know. And when I originally found her months and months ago and online, I was just searching for, I don't even remember what I was searching for now, but at the time it was very, I felt smart when I was typing it into the search engine. And when I found her, that was the same thing that I thought was she's perfect for this season. So I'm glad that she joined us.
Yeah, me too.
So without further ado, Thais Mantovani. Well, Thais, welcome to Climify. It's a
Thank
pleasure to have you here. Thank you for doing this.
No worries. I'm glad to be here with you, Eric.
Yeah, likewise. The theme of this season is one that we're really happy with, and it's called Change the System. And we're starting out with this season asking every guest, what does that system mean to
Mm,
you?
that's a great question. And I love starting that because I think this is actually the starting point that we need to wrap our heads around what the systems mean. For me, the system is this interwoven narratives. What do I mean by that? So we human beings, we live by meaning. We put meaning into everything we do, right? And we create the way we relate to each other. So our economy is created by us, the way we exchange products, money, services. We created much of the way that we live our lives today. If we look back to when we were hunters and gatherers, nothing like not nothing, but the way we interacted with each other was very different, and the way we
Hmm.
gave meaning to life, to nature, to eating, to interactions was very different as well. So it's the way we evolve meaning and the way we give ourselves security and the possibility for our species to expand and to thrive in this planet. So these narratives that are very interwoven, they come from different places. So they come from the north of the country, the south of the country as the global north, the global south.
Right.
And they experience different ways of being in the world. So for me, the systems is the stories we tell ourselves why we are here in the world and the way that we should live in the world. If you ask someone that lives in India, the system might be something very different from
Hmm.
someone in Brazil and someone in the United States or someone in Europe. But we did a very good job in the past couple of years with the globalization movement into turning the system as one. And I think globalization movement is like a new version of the colonization that
Yes.
happens in the world. So it's the way of bringing the whole world under one big narrative. So you don't have the diversity of different narratives of how to live in the world anymore. You have one big narrative. And then you have like companies, which is a way of organizing people and products and to create food or goods or services that offer the same service all around the world. You have entertainment such as Netflix. So many narratives that now are in this very westernized way of seeing the world that has spread out throughout the world. So I think this is what we're talking is the uh,
Yeah.
main system. I think we live in a world that there are many different systems, but we now are ruled or under a big umbrella of this Western way of viewing the world, which I would say would be the major system that we are in right now.
Yeah. It's the neoliberal globalization
Exactly.
of yeah. Yeah, this past summer I was in Europe, and there was a lot of I'm in America, and there's a lot of Americans traveling there, and there were Starbucks everywhere I went, and I guess I shouldn't have been surprised, I guess, considering what you just said, but I was surprised, and I avoided them as best as I could because I didn't want I went to Europe not to be in the US.
Exactly.
Right? And there's different cultural aspects of every country. I was in Switzerland, so there's a German side, there's a French side. So going to different parts were different experiences. But there's Starbucks. I don't want to pick just on Starbucks, but it's
So
ubiquitous.
many others are just the same, right?
Yeah, yeah. And I'm wondering, when you travel, I'm guessing you also see
Mm,
things pop up that,
exactly.
yeah.
I also feel this way at the globalization movement and also the colonization a few years behind. Like, so Brazil has, where I'm from Brazil. So we have 500 years of colonizational process. It's not that much if you think, right?
It's still
In
too
the
much.
world history. Yeah, it is a lot. But if you look in the world history or the human history, it's not that much. But how much we've changed. Like when I go visit indigenous communities who still live from the forest and I come back to the city and my parents, like my ancestry is from Italy. It's super
Mm,
different. Like
yeah,
the color of
yeah.
my skin, the color of my hair, the way I speak, the way I see life, the way I live life. It's completely different. So it has changed a lot in not such a great period of time if you look into world history, for example. And yeah, when I travel the world, I see the world becoming more of United States, more of Europe everywhere we go. And I
Agreed.
think this a component which I think is part of this different future that we are talking about here, which is localization.
Mhm.
So looking into what is this special essence of each place. What is the local coffee shop? What is the local food that we eat here? What is the local artist that we eat here? The local language that we have here. And this is the richness of diversity. And this is, for me, it's the future. If we look into changing the system, it's much more about the systems being able to coexist together than changing one umbrella system for another. It's
I
about
see.
diversity, it's about localization, it's about having different places, such as nature, different biomes and different ways of organizing ourselves being respected, different economies being respected, and non-violently being able to exist in a space of non-violence.
Well, this show is about helping to create positive impact, and I'm curious about what your first experience was with making an impact, and when did you realize that you could change things?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think most of us which are caught in the system, so we're caught in this big umbrella narrative that we need to have money and create success and have a great job and have a family and all this story of what success means and be famous and all these
Mhm.
types of things. You start out as a young person wanting to achieve the story of success.
Yeah,
So I went out to school to have the best grades and then to college and then working in a big company and making myself worthy of living and worthy of being someone my parents would be proud of, my friends would be
right.
proud of, right?
The
Bringing
job
me
and
my
the
life.
in the house.
Exactly.
Yeah, yeah,
And of course, having money in the economy that we live today, which the way we exchange things is through money, is important for everyone to live and to eat, and having a house, it is important as well. But it's the way we look at it. We look at it as it's our final objective. And when I was in the middle beginning of my career in marketing, so my graduation was in marketing, I started to realize that the story was success was not bringing me happiness. It
mm,
was making me depressed, and I was having burnouts, and I was super stressed, working until midnight and worrying about things that weren't really making the world a better place.
right.
And that's when I think regeneration and the sustainability movement, for me, it's a movement that goes hand in hand with self-knowledge, with understanding yourself, with knowing who you are. Because I think we are living a big crisis of the human race, like society, understanding who they are and what's our place. That's
Yeah,
the root of our problem. We think the world is here to serve us, but we are part of the world to serve its maintenance, to serve the way it's functions in a space to be stewards of abundance of life. And I think our view, our stories, the system is shifted to a story that doesn't sustain that. So when I understood that the way I was living was not good for me and was not good for people around me, and the impact that I was doing, like the final result of my work, wasn't really great. I was just selling more things because I worked in
yeah.
marketing. I started to feel bad. And I started to understand that I needed to know myself better, what made me happy. So I always tell people, like, if you want to work with impact, start by yourself, knowing yourself, who you are, what are your values, what do you really want to do in life, what really makes you happy. Start questioning things around you. Start
Hmm.
questioning your own story. So this is what I did. I went through a self-knowledge path. So started meditating, doing therapy, and trying to understand who I was and what I wanted to do with my life. And this is when I discovered that I had a really big nature connection space in myself. That when I was in nature, I felt better. That when I had a relationship with animals, with trees, with forests, I felt like I was complete, like I belonged
It's
to
beautiful.
her.
Yeah.
Exactly. And this is when I said, okay, so I want to work for that. Because for me, work was always something like something that you put inside the world, to the world, like you give to the world. And I was in a spiritual meeting these days, and I heard one of the persons in the group said a story that for me, a metaphor that for me fits perfectly. This is how I felt, but I couldn't put it into words back then. So a tree creates its fruits as a result of its being, right? To reproduce itself as a result of its process. And normally the fruits come out of the flowers, which are expressions of beauty and reproduction systems of the tree. And this fruit is not for the tree to eat itself. It's for the future. It
Hmm.
disperses fruits for the future, right? To maintain the species and for other animals to eat and take this seed somewhere else. So this is how I feel like when our work to the world is serving the world. I don't want to work for myself. I want to work to create a better place for other people, for other generations. So I understood that about myself. And this was when I started working with impact. So I started first working on myself, changing my habits, changing the way I
Yeah.
think, changing the people I relate to, trying to understand and go as deep as I could. And then when I felt I was ready, I started actually working with it. So working with indigenous communities, I also worked with animal protection, working with circular economy. So I started like infiltrating the impact system and people who are already doing for many, many, many years, which I had no idea of because this was a world that was not part of mine.
Yeah.
And when I understood that there were other bubbles and that my bubble wasn't the only one, then I started exploring. And this was the first time that I believe that I made impact by changing myself. So changing what I ate, for example. So today I'm vegan. So this for
Oh,
me is what
congratulations. That's hard to do.
it is.
I'm
But
vegetarian, and veganism is hard.
go gradual, one thing at a time. You get used to it, but don't be an extremist because it will be very hard.
Don't be militant about it. No.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. I appreciate that story because I feel a bit of myself in that story, in that I was in advertising and design and realized, like you, that I was not doing what I thought would help others because I was, like you, selling. In my case, I was selling calculators, and I was, yeah, it led me to rethink my future. You ended up going to get a master's in holistic sciences from Schumacher College,
Yes.
ecological studies,
Mhm.
and I went in to get a master's degree to teach because I thought education could be that
Mhm.
impact point, which you also do. And so I'm curious how all that transnational education influenced your approach to the work you're doing right now, which you're doing a lot.
So I think education is a big systems change and a big acupuncture point, or all this more technical names, but it's a point of change, of mutation. Things happen when education comes into priority, I would say. And I always love to study. So I can't say that I'm not biased in this opinion. I think I'm very curious. I think that institutions today kill curiosity out of students
Yes, I've
because it
heard
makes it
studies
so
about this.
boring
Yeah.
the way we study that it's crazy. But if you're generally a curious human being, studying is great. It's like knowing what happens in the world and trying to understand, and empathy, it's part of education as well, like trying to imagine yourself in different situations and learn what's different than you. So I think education has a big part in systems change. So when I was in the market working for a big advertisement agency, I had my mental health issues. I started
Mm.
working on myself, and then I understood that I wanted to change what I worked. That most of, not only, but a big part of what was making me ill mentally and physically as well was my work, because 90% of my time and energy was dedicated to my work. I was in the office like
Marketing.
morning to late at night.
Yeah.
So it was not good. So then I understood, okay, so I want to work with something else. So if I want to work with something else, I want to study, because I don't want to work with something that I don't know, that I don't understand. Right. I've
Right.
studied
Yeah.
4 years of marketing to work with it. Now I want to change to sustainability or impact. I need to study. So I went after a few places for me to study, and I found Schumacher College. And I love Schumacher College because it brings a more holistic view of the world. So the systems understanding. So it goes through a philosophy of science, a cultural evolution. It looks into economy, into design. So you kind of have a more broader view of how we got ourselves into this mess.
Yeah.
So I moved from Brazil to England. My parents were very angry with me and they
Oh,
disappointed.
really?
Yeah, they were like, "You're running away from your life to study ecology in England. Are you crazy?" I was like, "No, I think I'm gonna be happy there."
Yeah, this is a transition. You need to maybe
Exactly.
go somewhere to make that transition.
Exactly. And it was the best thing that I did because I came out of my bubble completely, friends, family, work,
Mm.
city, everything. And I moved to the countryside of England in it's a small town called Totnes. And I lived a much simpler life. I had different conversations, different people around me. I had my hands in the earth, planting every single day,
Oh,
cooking. So Schumacher is a community college for learning, a community college. So you participate of everything in the college. So you plant the food you eat, you cook the food you eat, you help on cleaning. And I think this is amazing because in such a colonized country as Brazil is, you always, as a privileged person, which I am, you always have someone doing things for you, someone
mhm.
cooking for you, someone cleaning your house for you, someone doing parts of your job for you, someone building your house for you. And
Yeah.
you're never get the full experience of actually doing for yourself your own life. So it was beautiful to experience that, and also everything that we studied. So I believe this path within deep diving into science was really important to me because it gave me a perspective of what science is and the philosophy behind science. And science was the big, for me, politics and science are very intertwined. So politics and science were really the beginning of understanding what life is and how life works and how we want to organize ourselves around that. So religion also played a big role on everything. But I believe that studying science and philosophy was science was something that made me twist my understanding of the world completely. And then after that, studying holistic science, which is like a systemic science, so understanding different philosophies and ways that scientists think up the world, and studying climate change, then I understood. Okay, so we have a type of science which is reductionist, cut things into parts and don't see the relationship between these parts. And we have a system of belief, of exchange of products, money, food, everything, which is based on this worldview that we have to cut
Yeah.
everything in parts, separate everything, and this individual parts have little relationship between each other, and they ones are more important than the others. So then I was like, now everything's makes sense. And
Mm.
then when you look into James Lovelock's work on Gaia theory, then you understand that no, okay, so the world is interconnected and is interdependent. So even if we have this illusion that we're separating everything into parts, it's actually interconnected, and when we were beginning to see the effects right now. So just to finish my point, right now in Brazil, we are living one of the biggest climate disasters, climate emergencies in the south of our country. So the state of Rio Grande do Sul is living one of the biggest floods it has ever lived. So
Oh my gosh, I didn't know
350
this.
350 towns within the state are underwater, and the water is so high that the water is up to the roof of the houses.
Oh, I've
And
seen photos of this. Oh my gosh.
exactly,
I didn't realize that was Brazil.
it is Brazil. And it's right now. So people all over Brazil are donating, flying there, using jet skis and boats to people were in their houses for 4 days. There's no clean water, no electricity,
Hmm.
and a big city. Imagine, I don't know, New York underwater. So it's a big city. It's a big city called Porto Alegre, completely underwater, and
Yeah.
all the surrounding cities as well. And this, if you don't have a systemic worldview, if you don't have a worldview of interconnectedness, you think it's as an isolated event. Oh my God,
It's a great point.
nature happened here, a big
Yeah.
rainfall, and we're living this isolated event. But if you have a systemic worldview, you understand that, well, we are burning up the world. In Brazil, the biggest emissions of greenhouse gases is land use. So we're deforesting our forests, creating a cattle that it's not even eaten by Brazilian people. Most of it is exported.
Yeah.
So soy and cattle is the most degrading activity for in Brazil soil. So you have a super heat in the cities in the center of Brazil, and the rain from the Amazon goes directly to the south and doesn't pass through the middle of Brazil, which is hyper hot. So it goes through a different path that it would before. And it precipitates in the state of Rio Grande do Sul, which is in the south of Brazil, because it's when it's cold, when the cold weather from the countries below come up to Brazil, and it precipitates. And it's much more rain than it would be if it wasn't so hot, and if all our human activities weren't changing the ecological system, the climate of the world. So when you start to think in this more interconnected way, you understand, oh, okay, so I see that my actions right here affects the entire world or the entirety of my country. And people from Rio Grande do Sul, which is, I don't know, kilometers away from the city which I am right now, are suffering things that I helped to create as well. So
Yeah.
it changes everything for me.
Do you find that just in your work or in your experience of being a human being that people along the lines of climate change or any sort of big issue don't really do anything until it affects them.
Mm,
I wonder that only because I'm thinking about your story and it reminds me of Hurricane Katrina in New
mm,
Orleans
mm,
back in, what was it, 2004 or five. And that was a big city and people completely lost everything. Right. And what really changed about how we live since 20 years ago here in the US?
mhm.
I
Yeah.
don't know. Cause I feel like if it does happen to you, maybe you change, but hey, people just went right back to New Orleans,
Mhm,
and this is where I live. And
mhm.
it'll happen again. It'll happen again, right?
Yeah. And again and again.
Yeah,
Yeah.
unfortunately, but you call yourself a regenerative strategist. And I think that's a great term. What is a regenerative strategist?
Well, think that education is a big space for transformation of worldviews. And if you don't have education towards understanding the interconnectedness of life spiritually for yourself, in the community, in the society, and the planet, it's very hard for you to change how you live because you don't understand the why you need to change and how things work.
Mhm.
So I think even people suffering in Rio Grande do Sul or suffering from Hurricane Katrina or suffering from COVID, which is something that just happened to us,
Exactly.
we
It's still
don't
happening, right?
change. Exactly. We don't change because we don't understand it fully. It's
Mm,
sometimes it becomes too complicated with the way it's being announced to us. And I believe that most of what comes out, it's maybe not designed for us to understand fully as well. So I don't think regeneration and sustainability is something that the middle class people from Brazil, for example, understand what it actually is.
I agree. Not even in the US either.
Yeah.
It's not something they
So this is why I think we need to work with education to change worldviews. People need to understand where they live, why things are happening, so they can choose the way they want to be in the world. Because I don't think we choose today. We are blinded, so we don't
Mhm.
understand. And being a regenerative strategist for me is about uh, understanding the strategy and the organization that we, which are in the movement, need to have towards changing the system. So, what is regeneration in a simple sentence? Regeneration is giving back more than you received. So life gives us so much. It gives us life, air, water, food. Everyone depends on nature. We are nature. We're part of it. Like if you eat anything, you're already depending on nature. If you're breathing, you're already depending on nature. If you have the sun, light, energy, everything. So life is already giving us so much, and we're just taking, and not giving it back. And nature works on abundance. The tree doesn't leave one seed for its future, it leaves many seeds.
Yeah.
And ones that have the right conditions will flourish, right? So there's plenty of food for everyone in the world. There's plenty of soil for everyone in the world. We just need to organize ourselves
Yeah.
better. So we need a better strategy, a strategy that gives back to the world more than we're taking. So we can always have abundance to take more when we need. So I understand myself as a regenerative strategist because I'm working on myself constantly to expand the vision and the way I understand the world to a more systemic and holistic understanding. And I think strategy and organization is something really important that we should be looking towards collaborating. I think collaboration is the key to the future. So, how NGOs who are working with deforestation, who are working with waste, who are working with the zero emissions, net zero emissions, and all. How can these many different initiatives collaborate to create a more organized movement and systemic movement so that people understand who we are, what we're doing, what is our objective, and how can they participate? Because there's lots of people with climate anxiety that have no idea how can they participate, right?
Yeah.
So we need to
Yeah.
be super clear. So I think strategy, organization, and collaborating is one of the most important things that the regenerative or the sustainability movement needs towards bringing the bigger masses of people, so like more people into the movement, creating a trim tab effect. So there's a person that you guys should research about him. He's one of my teachers from Schumacher College. His name is Daniel Wall,
Oh,
and he
yes.
wrote yeah
Wow.
he wrote a book on
I
design.
always wanted to meet him. So,
Yeah, I'll connect both of you
okay.
because I think it'd be great for the podcast as well. And Daniel is a great researcher, and he wrote an article about trim tabs, which is we don't need to change everyone. Like we don't need to, as I was saying, you have the capitalism umbrella. Now you need the regenerative umbrella. It's not about that. It's about people understanding as much as they can about how life works and have the possibility to choose how they want to do, how they want to live, and how they want to be in the world, inhabit this world with information. Not only information, but like bringing to the heart understanding of what's happening. And then we will be trim tabs, which is it's an analogy of the boat has its motor, so it goes like to the front, right? So it propels the boat to the front as the windmill's turn. But there are tabs attached to the back of the boat that gives them direction to the left, to the right,
Yeah.
right? So how do we change a little bit these tabs so that we change a bit the direction? And we don't need to be the people with the more money in the world to change the world. That's not it. We just need to organize ourselves. So I think this is what is being a regenerative strategist. A regenerative strategist is bringing strategy, organization, and collaboration in the regeneration movement, so we can understand ourselves as a global movement that works together, and we can create a more systemic impact than we are doing right now, which is already great, but I think we can do much better.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree. And now I understand what that means because I love the term. I want to be one.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering about the school you founded, Eco-Universidade,
Mhm.
and I want to go there. I don't know if I can enroll. Can you tell us about what kind of courses you offer? And it sounds like you teach there. That was
Yeah.
a that was a very good lecture about that topic. So, can you tell us more about your school you founded? And
Yeah.
also, I'm curious about what you're particularly proud of with this project because I'm sure there's a lot there.
Yes. Okay. So Eco-Universidade, which the translation would be Eco-University, was a project we founded when we came back from Schumacher College, because our study in our thesis from Schumacher College was how everything went wrong. So we started studying human history, how we organize ourselves. So agricultural revolution, industrial revolution, and all these things that change, and all these ways of organizing ourselves that change the way we are today. But also spiritually, how is to live in the forest with very little resources and feel cold and feel afraid. So we went into many different types of experiments and ways of understanding how did humanity evolve into this space that we are today, which is separation from nature. Human and nature are something different. How did we come into evolve into thinking that? And then we came into lots of insights about this journey, which I can share I share in my classes, and I can share in other spaces as well because it's a very long story. But the final inputs and results that we got from this research is that domestication of thought happened throughout many of these events. So domestication of plants and animals happened in the agricultural revolution, domestication of the way we produce things. So domestication in a sense that there is a way that people should do things, and then we should be told on how we're supposed to do. So, and people, and not, I don't like to be a generalist, but people who have less access to intellectual studies are normally more manipulated, right?
Yeah, very much.
So, so we understood that education had a big part there. This was the part that it was not only me, Thais, that felt that education was important for my life. I understood how education was important for the system and how education today maintains the system as it is. So, for example, in Brazil, public education It's not a question about money. The Brazilian government has enough money to educate the full population. It's just that it's not a place where we want to invest, because the more educated people are with good education, critical education, emancipated education, people start questioning things, and questioning things is not good
Yeah.
for a one narrative. Because if you have one narrative, you need to answer all these questions, and they're not answerable by this one way of seeing the world. So we understood that if we want to work with education, we need to bring a different way of experiencing the world, a different way of understanding who we are, which I think education should be about.
Yeah.
Understand where we live and who we are. Forming a place for people to be and understand what it is to be a human being on the planet, and not to, I want to understand marketing because I want to sell things. This is just being a wheel within the system.
Yeah. That cog in the machine.
Exactly. Exactly. So we wanted to create a different place. So we came back to Brazil. So we started understanding what are participatory methods of learning, collaboratory methods of learning, places where students could create their own projects and learn by themselves and simulate critical thinking. And we were very inspired by Schumacher as well on the philosophy of head, heart, and hands. So we have the intellectual understanding of life, but we also have feelings and a spiritual way of experiencing life. And we also have our experience of our hands, our actions, our hand in the ground way of experiencing life. So when you make a balance between all these ways of viewing the world, experiencing the world, then you're a more connected human being in towards your place and your territory, and the understanding of who you are in your family, in your community, and all of that. So we brought that back to Brazil because we learned so many fantastic things in Schumacher College, but they were contextualized to Europe, westernized concept.
Yeah. They need to be
We put it-
local.
Exactly. So we came back to Brazil and we're like, okay, now we're going to be Brazil ecological community of learning. So we went to learn with indigenous communities, with Black communities, with peoples on the favelas, so low income communities around the cities, trying to understand on the borders of the center where innovation was, where these different narratives, these different ways of being in the world still existed. Because in the centers of the big cities, the main narrative is going to be the only way that you see the world, one story of success.
Mhm.
But if you go to the countryside, or if you go to the deep heart of the Amazon and you meet with indigenous people there, or with people that live by the river, which we call ribeirinhos, which is traditional communities that are indigenous people, white people, Black people that are all together, you have different ways of viewing success, viewing life, view relationship to nature, and all of that. So we saw that Brazil was this amazing place of diversity, right? So not only of different ways of viewing the world, but of nature, of biodiversity. So Brazil has 20% of the biodiversity of the world. So it's a very diverse
20%?
place. Yeah.
Oh my
Which is
gosh. I
big.
didn't know that.
Yeah.
That's a lot.
So we said, okay, so let's bring this diversity to the table, to the space, right? To under the mango tree, which we will sit in a circle and talk about life.
Love
So
that.
Eco-Universidade is this space. So we have courses about indigenous wisdoms, about biomimicry, which is learning science from nature and respecting nature whilst you do it. Agroforestry, how do you plant food in a forest without destructing the world? So how do you plant food in a space respecting nature? And all these types of topics. So we bring experts. We don't like the word experts, but in English it makes sense.
It does. Yeah.
So mentors from each of these areas, which are living in practice in their life this culture. So people who work with agroforestry, who lives in agroforestry spaces, people who work with biomimicry, indigenous people that live their culture, to bring a bit of their different ways of viewing the world so we can create collaborative discussions. So in Eco-Universidade, you can enroll in a course in our website. You will see many different courses that we offer, and you will be part of an online group that will create their own learning experience with the person who is there to bring their worldview.
Yeah.
So, for example, the last course we gave was about indigenous wisdom. We invited an indigenous professor to teach the course, and it was basically him telling us a bit of his experience and the way he views the world, and having space for people to collaborate, show how they view their questions, their anxieties, and evolving together the way we experience the world. And also bringing to the heart, so bringing meditation, bringing spaces of understanding our feelings and bringing meaning to the experience, and also bringing it to the hands. So if we're talking about planting, we go there and we plant. If we're talking about experiencing nature, we give you uh, exercises for you to go in nature and experience. We also are planning trips, learning trips to indigenous communities that you can
That's great.
participate as well. So there are many different forms of learning, which I think this is the most beautiful part, the diversity of ways that you can learn about being alive.
So it sounds like if it's some of it's online, I can come to your university.
Yes, of course you can. There is a bit of a language barrier, so we need to see
Oh,
which courses are in English, which courses are in Portuguese, but everyone can
good point.
participate in our online version. And spoiler alert, we are working into a online community platform, which is
Okay.
really going to be worldwide, developed by artificial intelligence on translating. So you
Mm,
will see one of our indigenous professors is speaking in English, but he doesn't speak English, which will be good part of technology translating in AI. But I'll let you know as soon as it's out. It's still on the developing phase.
okay. Because I'm very interested in this. As part of your education as well that you do there, thank you from one teacher to another for being an educator. It is hard work, but I do think it makes an impact.
It
Uh,
does.
it does. Interested in something I read, I think it was on your site called Eco-Futuro.
Mhm.
And this is something that's emphasized a lot in seemingly in your curriculum. What is Eco-Futuro and what does it look like?
Mhm. So, eco futuro, which is eco
Oh,
future in
oops,
English.
totally mispronounced that one.
That's okay. Portuguese is really hard.
Yeah, I don't think I can be in your
Yeah.
Portuguese classes based on that.
It is hard to understand and to learn. So eco future is the what we are trying to explain and to envision with people together. What would be our future if we took everything that's happened systemically seriously? If we took climate change seriously, what would actually be the world that we're living into?
Mm,
So in our classes, we often do meditations that we imagine the future if we had solar panels for everyone, if we had people in the rooftop growing foods, different the cities would be. How different would be if indigenous people were more valued and the way of producing food and other things that are part of our products, for example, seeds or oils and these types of things, were more valued and were bought from. So we try to understand what are the solutions that already are here today happening, but maybe in a small scale, if they were available for other spaces and if they were subsidized and had more space to develop in abundance. So Ecofuturo, Ecofuture is this space that we envision the world if we actually took the crisis that we're living in seriously. And I think it's beautiful because we lost our right to imagine. Everything that we imagine and we dream of, people come, this is utopia. This is not going to happen.
right.
You need much money to change this. It's not true. If you bring your community around, you can do great changes.
Yep.
And to prove this, there is the transition town movement, where if you don't know Rob Hopkins, he's a
I
great
don't.
research. He's the founder of the transition town movement, which is basically gather your community around, even if it's a street, a neighborhood, or a countryside town. You can gather people who want to make the difference and pull money together and have local farmers come and have local panels for one house and then the other house and then the other house. So how can you work together and know the power of community into scaling change? And I think it's a beautiful movement, and
Me
it
too.
shows that our eco future could be our eco present if we decide, if we
Hmm.
just make this decision right now.
If we made this system we live in right now, we can make that system too.
Exactly. Exactly.
You've already sold me on it.
Let's do this.
Let's do it. I also want to say I truly appreciate you talking about meditation so much. I've heard it many times in this conversation, and it has helped me significantly in my life. And it does sound similar for, I mean, it sounds the same for you that it has helped you. I have also looked at myself a lot, especially since I've changed to become an educator, but I struggle with anxiety, and not just climate anxiety, but so meditation has been something that has brought me inspiration. It has brought me peace. So yeah, and appreciate you talking about it because I think the world would be a little bit better if people meditated before they did
So much better.
some crazy thing, you know?
Yeah.
Let's
And I
just
think meditation has this very important role to play
yeah.
because we live in a very fast paced, rapid fast food society. Everything is for yesterday. We don't think long term, and we don't take the time to contemplate our actions, our decisions. So meditations brings us to a different time of experiencing the world, a different way of sitting down and understand, just letting your thoughts run by, contemplating life, bringing yourself to a different way of experiencing the present moment. And
Yeah.
I think this is one of the most important things that we need to do as as human society, because we are automatically on the rat race. We don't even question ourselves.
Yep.
And when you start to meditate, then you start to experience life a different way. And it's amazing because it's practice based. I can tell you how meditation is great as much as I like for 40 minutes on without end. But it's only if you practice that you understand. So it's great that we're talking about this. And maybe this is an incentive for people who are listening to us to try
Yeah.
and more this practice into your daily life, because this is the first step of change for me.
Do you do guided meditation or do you it's just sort of
I love all types of meditations.
okay,
I love
yeah.
guided meditations. I do. But my daily practice is short meditations throughout the day. I
Mhm.
feel like I do only one, it's not enough
Yeah,
because
I
I get
agree. I
stressed
agree.
throughout the day. So I rewired my routine and my brain into whenever I feel overwhelmed, I stop.
Me too.
Go to the bathroom. I don't care. I need to pee.
Yeah, me
Then I go to the bathroom and I take 5 minutes, 10 minutes. I don't care if people think that I'm doing weird things in the bathroom.
yeah,
I take the time to
yeah,
myself, and then I become a completely different person and I take decisions differently.
me too.
And this
Yeah,
is the most important thing.
I guess I admit that a lot of times I fall asleep, which if
Mhm.
but, hey, I maybe I needed a nap too. So
Yeah.
both are good.
Yeah. We're tired. It's a very fast paced way of living that we
Yeah, it
modern people.
is. Well, I'm wondering since you also are an educator and you work with people who are your students and I wonder what you give for advice if they also want to disrupt dominant narratives or champion regeneration or just as change the system, right? The theme of this season.
Yeah. Well, most of my students, I always bring them what I've learned that changed my life because I think this is what I can give. I'm not the owner of the truth. So every
Mm,
class we start, we are not telling you what's the truth and what's not. We're only telling you our experience of life. So you grab what makes sense for you and then go walk your own journey. So what I bring to them is what makes me sleep at night. So when I started to understand systemically all the problems that we're living, I was almost, oh my God, we're gonna die. I shouldn't have kids. I was freaking out, right?
yeah, yeah,
So I read something that Charles Eisenstein wrote and says in his books. So he has a book, The Most Beautiful World That Our Hearts Can See. Something like that. Maybe I'm
yeah,
mispronouncing it, but I love Charles Eisenstein and I
yeah.
love to the names of people that I learned from because they are part of who I am. And he says that maybe we will die, our generation will die in transition. We won't see the beautiful world that we are wanting.
I
And
believe that.
that's okay. Because as the story of the tree, we are creating the fruits for the future, for other people, for our kids and for other people's kids and for the planet. It's not selfishness for myself. I want to live in this eco village only for myself. No, it's for everyone.
Right.
So I always tell my students, if you're doing this, if you want to do this, embrace that you won't see all the results that you desire in your heart right now. You're working towards living presence for the future. So don't be anxious if your project doesn't go as well as you want, if you don't get as much funding as you want, if people don't understand what you're saying. It's all part of the transition.
Hmm.
We are going to make so many mistakes, but we're moving towards somewhere. And this is the most important thing. We cannot plan every single step of the way, but we can understand where we want to move to. So that's what I tell them at first, because I think anxiety plays a big role into crumbling people down. And I don't want my students to burn out and have
Me
lots
either.
of
No.
anxiety. Yeah, because they need to be well with themselves to put something good in the
Yeah,
world. If you're not feeling good, then you're not putting something good as well.
that's true. That's true.
So this is the first advice I give them. And then if you want to be a big systems changer, understand the system, study as much as you can, read, be open to everyone's opinions, read people who are climate that don't think that the climate change doesn't exist and try to understand their point of view. Be as empathic as you can with different ways of seeing the world and try and understand, see what makes sense for you and work on something you love. This is why self-knowledge is so important. If you
Yeah.
don't know what you love, what moves your heart, you will always suffer. So if I did this mistake, like when I started working with sustainability, I said, I can work with anything. Anything that is sustainable, I'm there. It's not true. There are things that makes your heart pop more. So I have friends who are crazy about waste. They love composting. They love talking about waste. This is great. This is why diversity is so important and makes us resilient. Because every single one of us has something in our hearts which, and not maybe one, maybe different couple of things that moves us, that makes us excited. Work with that. Education makes me excited. I'm working with that. Maybe science makes other people excited. Maybe circular economy, maybe agroforestry, so indigenous communities. I don't know, anything within the movement that makes your heart pop. I think that's where you should go and
Yeah.
then explore from that.
Well, I'm glad I recorded this because now I don't have to give this kind of lecture to my students. I can just, hey, let's play Thais's episode. This is yeah. Well, we're coming to my favorite and last question for you, and it is about teaching. And
Mm,
if you were asked to teach a design class, bunch of
mhm,
creative, smart people, what would you assign them to do?
mhm. Well, I think, well, this is a hard question, but I think the most important part of design is the research.
Mhm.
So I would tell them to study what they want to design for and with. So if you're trying to design a solution for a community or for a website, whatever you're designing for, study as much as you can. So I love interviewing people. Interview people who work in the area, who work with things that inspire you, get their experience. And from that, try and have a collective digestion of what came. Don't do it yourself. So, for example, when I start my projects and I want to design a learning experience for someone, we start by studying as much as we can with the people who are learning, who are going to be in the process, the territory where they're at, what they already know, where do they want to go, and why do they want to go there. So we try and understand the system as much as we can, and then we bring this to a collective of different minded people. So we bring people that have indigenous background, Black community descendants, and work with different areas. And we bring these people together and be like, okay, so what we found was this. What should we do with this? So you start designing by understanding the ancestry. So what the story that came before that place and that people.
Hmm.
And in the Regenesis design of regenerative cultures framework, we start by story of place. So it's kind of the same thing. Understand the story of people and story of place you're coming into. So you can empathically design for them. So I think this would be my advice to start designing. And
Great
then when you
advice.
are designing, so many things can happen, right? So many tools and ways you can go by.
Well, yeah, and I think that gosh, I'm going to mispronounce it again. Eco-Futuro.
That's great.
Okay. That imagining, what that future can be. I've heard this a few times, more than a few times from a lot of my guests, is that that's their design project.
Mhm.
Futuro is what is the future. You can design it. What is your place where you live looking like 30 years from now?
Exactly.
And it's not a utopia, but it's not an apocalypse, right?
Mhm.
It's a greener spot, a
Yeah.
healthier spot,
And to design that, you need to understand what has happened before.
right?
Indigenous communities, I love working with indigenous communities because they have so much wisdom. And one of the other tips that I would say for design is learn from nature. Nature is a great metaphor for our own process of development. So when we work education, we also try to see how there's a website called Ask Nature, which is
Hmm.
a biomimicry website. I love that website.
Me
So we
too.
try to understand how other beings figured out living, and we bring that into inspiration as well. So indigenous communities teach us a lot about that. And sometimes designing solutions are not that hard if you go into simple ways of relating to the world. And when I talk with a lot with indigenous communities, they show us that lots of the regenerative way we want to live in the world or sustainable solutions that we are looking at inventions, we are like, how can we become net zero? They have lots of the answers in their small community, in their small territory, in their localized way of living, but can be inspirations for other places as well. We don't need to
Yeah.
copy and paste, but we can be inspired from. So understanding, and they do that from understanding their territory and understanding their ancestry path. So understanding who came before them, how they did it, what was good, what didn't work, and what can we do better. And I think this is great. And there is a new term coming up in Brazil, which is called bioeconomy. So it's the new economy. It's the economy created from nature. So bioeconomy is basically how can we understand our economy, creating more nature than taking from nature and not giving it back. And
Right.
the indigenous communities do this greatly. So they take food, they take seeds, oils, everything that we need for our industrial system and to create that into goods. They are the ones that gather, that collect these materials from the forest without having to cut it, but taking it from the forest. And Brazil, as I said, has a very biodiverse place. So I don't think this works for everywhere. But for our country, there's a very big inspiration into looking into our past, the way our indigenous peoples who were here before colonization did, the way of eating, the way of changing resources, and being inspired by an indigenous economy, we can create our own bioeconomy. So there's a great book that just came out called Indigenous Bioeconomy. I'll share with you. Maybe we can put the link
Yeah, we
for people.
will. We will.
Perfect. For people to take a look, which is basically two indigenous people telling about how their economy is. What is an indigenous
Yeah.
economy? And indigenous economy is based on a standing up forest, on an existing forest. So I think the design process, the indigenous design process is really beautiful because you look into the territory, how the territory works, and you look into the story of people and how that changed the territory. The beginning of the book is the Amazon forest today is not the most diverse place of the world and the biggest forest of the world and the more fertile soil of the world only because of non-human beings. There were hundreds of human communities living sustainably there that planted and created this ecosystem collaboratively with nature,
Yes,
designed with nature. And I think this is one of the most incredible things that we can learn from.
that's a perfect way to end our conversation.
Amazing. Thank you.
And it reminds me too of a episode I did in the first season with Aquila Stewart, and she said, the only way to move forward is to learn from the past. And I think that's exactly right. Well, thank you, Thais. It's been an
Thank
honor to learn from you today, and I truly appreciate the time we spent together.
Thank you so much, Eric. Thank you for your work, your dedication to nature and to the world. Thank you for having me and having such a comfortable and a place for me to speak from the heart and from my own truth, my own experience. And I hope everyone that's listening have a glance of our connection and the feeling that we're having here today, which is really beautiful. So thank you very much for having me. And I wish the most abundance and great long-term project for Climify podcast.
And for your school too, and all the work you do. Thank you so much. Well, I'm back here with Jacqui, and we're in our last segment of this episode where we unpack what our guest had to say. And today, of course, Thais Mantovani. What a wonderful conversation, Jacqui. She had so many things to say, and I just couldn't stop taking notes.
Yeah, she just kind of flowed with information and experiences and then tied them all back together. And then, she'd say something and you're like, I'm both relating to you and also looking up to you at the same time. I don't, I don't know how, but
She's a really
it
good
is.
storyteller. Like her
Yeah.
story was just, I don't know. I like I said earlier in this episode and during the interview, I really resonated with her experience.
Yeah. I loved hearing it because, some you have these ideals sometimes in society that you gotta come out of college, you gotta get a job exactly in the degree that you got,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
you need to have it for X amount of time, and you need to be happy. You have to be happy with it. And it's refreshing to hear, somebody who's like, "Yeah, I wasn't happy at all with any of it,
No.
even with the society that I was living in, so I made a change." And she made such a big change, and she, took a risk, which she did talk about, and, it paid off for her. I'm sure it wasn't as smooth as she told us, but just hearing that, you can make a change and you're not stuck in what you've done, and you can keep moving and doing great things.
Yeah, it's a great call to action is remember, life's a journey. It's
Yeah.
not one of my big things that I took away from this into a call for action. I mean, saying it makes me feel a little cheesy, but I still think there's a good amount of honesty in it. And that is go explore the world and find that something you love to do. That's so important, but it's hard to do. It's hard to do with, everything that the pressures we have, um, from our families, from on ourselves, from society.
Yeah, and you really don't know until you go explore. I believe that, when you grow up in a Western society with, Western beliefs and education systems, that's all you're gonna know. So if you have the privilege and the opportunities to travel to different countries, different communities that don't develop this like Western society,
Right.
wow, kind of like those indigenous communities in Brazil that she was talking about. It could open your mind up to new things that we don't even know how to grasp the concept of, because education to us means something completely different, specifically like Brazil.
Yeah, invest in education, call to
Yeah,
action, even to our, policymakers, right? I mean, education is so important.
it
And
is. Yeah,
yeah, I mean, she talked about how it can change your worldview. You don't
yeah,
even have to really go anywhere far away.
no,
Just a book, just a book.
yeah. And there's something so rewarding and also educating of having those educated conversations But it's so important to keep an open mind. You know, if you walk into a conversation immediately thinking that you're right and that your ideals are the right, like you're not going to take anything from it. You know, there's no such thing as right or wrong in certain
Yeah.
scenarios, especially about education, because when it comes to nature and earth, everybody has a different perspective on it.
Yeah, I'm gonna date myself, but I grew up watching Reading Rainbow with LeVar
Yeah.
Burton. I'm not gonna sing the theme song because I'm not a good singer, but that whole idea of it's in a book, right?
Yeah.
The world's out there and you can learn about it in different ways, but you got to yourself in it. And the other thing that really jumped out to me from her conversation was this, and I've heard this from other people throughout my time hosting Climify, and that is imagine the world or the future that you want and then make it happen, eco futuro.
Mhm.
Um, and I think that has a lot of power.
Yeah. Because if you take those baby steps and she highlighted, strategy, if you would dedicate yourself and you just dive head in, I mean, at least you can say you tried.
Yeah.
It's better than saying you tried than saying, "Oh, I wish that I had," because you never know until you find out,
Right.
which is both scary, but also, encouraging. Or if you have a fear of missing out like I do, you just do it because you're like,
You have
well,
FOMO. You have
oh,
FOMO.
yeah. I have such bad FOMO. So, sometimes I'll just do it out of spite. Because 'cause I'm like, if I don't, in an hour from now, I'm gonna be like, "Well, I didn't even try. What if I actually liked it?" So, I'm just gonna do it now.
Yeah. So many famous quotes there. Of course, there's Yoda, do or do not. There is no try. And then
Yeah.
there's don't listen to Homer Simpson, who said trying is the first step to failure.
Yeah,
That's
no.
not the message of this interview.
Yeah, like those I remember seeing those posters specifically in math class. I don't know why they did that, but, there's no such thing as a stupid question.
Right. Of
Um,
course. Yeah.
yeah, they really highlighted that in math class because we were all sitting there with wondering, "Okay, well, we all are asking the same question, but nobody has the courage to
What
actually
what
say it."
grade was this where that was in math class for you?
I specifically remember when I started doing, like, algebra in middle
Okay.
school, but I'm pretty sure it went all the way up to high school,
Yeah. Okay.
just being like, "There's no such thing," and you're like, "I don't know.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
I don't know."
yeah, I've even said it in my classes, and then in retrospect, I'm like, yeah, there are some stupid questions.
There
I'm
can be. But the thing is you don't know until you ask them. I've had
That's
those
true.
moments where,
That's
you
true.
ask them and you're like, "I shouldn't have asked that."
Yeah,
I know the answer. I just needed
true.
clarification.
Well, Thais also was asking people to be curious more, and so you have
Yeah.
to ask questions. You'll have to ask more questions for that.
Uh, she seems like such an amazing person to be around. Somebody who
Yeah,
uplifts you and encourages you to find your happiness and also go outside your comfort zone. And that's, if you find people in your life who encourage you to do that, I think that that's really special.
call to action for you and I, Jackie, is to learn Portuguese.
Yeah.
So we can go to her school in Brazil because apparently it's all in Portuguese.
Yeah. I know some Spanish. I heard that that's really kind
It's
of close
close,
to
but
it,
yeah, it's
but
different. It's different.
yeah, but then when, you look at her website and I'm looking at it and I'm like, "Oh, this I don't know anything."
No, it's a
This is
totally
not
different,
like
yeah, totally different language. So that's a
it
big
is,
call to
yeah.
action. But another great call to action, Jackie, is to check out her work online. Where can we find more about Thais
Yes,
on the
if you
interwebs?
yeah, if anybody would like to keep up to date with Thais herself, what she's doing as an individual, she has an Instagram. It's Thais P. Mantovani, and her name will obviously be in the title of the episode, so you can use that to find her. But if you'd like to know more information about the university that she helped co-found in Brazil, they have a website, which is Eco-Universidade.com, and they also have an Instagram with that handle as well.
And we'll put those URLs in the show description. So
Yeah.
just click on it, right?
Yeah.
Well, it was great to unpack this episode with you, Jackie. This is our last episode of the season
Oh my
for
gosh.
our systems, change the system theme. And so I guess everyone, you should stay tuned for how we're going to wrap up the season with a conversation about what we learned about changing the system.
Yeah, we had a lot of really great guests who brought a lot of very different perspectives and walks of life. So
Yeah,
trying to tie it all off in a pretty little bow
we'll
is
do
going to
our
be fun.
best. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. We'll find out soon. You'll find out
Yeah.
soon. If you would like more knowledge about the topics discussed by our guests today, you can check out these past episodes from our Climate family. Sarah Ichioka, Season 3, Episode 8. Katie Kamehameha, Season 3, Episode 13. Melinda Adams, Season 3, Episode 21. Nisha Mary Palouse, Season 3, Episode 6. And Sadie Redwing, Season 2, Episode 4. Thanks for listening. And we want to hear from you. What did you take away from this discussion? We also want to know how you are changing the system. Email us at climifypodcast@gmail.com or connect with us on Instagram at climifypodcast. We would love to read your inspirational stories on the show in upcoming episodes. This program is produced by Cam Berkins with writing and research by Abigail Zook, Jacqui Himmel, and Bhavna Bhavani Shankar. Designed by Adam Java. Sound engineering and editing by me, Eric Benson. A special thanks to Mark O'Brien at the Climate Designers and Tink Media for their sage advice to make this season even better than the last. You can find design prompts and more information on all our guests this season at climatedesigners.org/edu/Climify and on Instagram and LinkedIn at Climify Podcast. If you enjoy the work we all do here and you have a spare minute or two, we would truly appreciate it if you left a rating and review over at Apple Podcasts. The more folks reviewing our program, the higher the algorithm pushes us up in the search results. And in turn, the more likely we all could learn how to become climate designers.